A crack in the wall isn't always a sign of collapse. It might just be the place where light begins to seep in. And maybe that's how it feels this morning. Like something in you cracked. A part of your life didn't hold the weight. A relationship, a plan, a dream, or maybe just your own strength. It didn't collapse entirely, but it broke enough for you to notice. Enough for you to question, am I still usable like this? Or have I already lost too much? But what if this isn't the end of your story? What if the broken parts are the very places God wants to meet you? When a stained glass window breaks, it's not discarded. It's reassembled into something more striking than before, something that lets the light through in unexpected ways. Your life, even in its damaged form, still holds beauty, still holds purpose, still holds the fingerprints of the God who created you, not for perfection, but for perseverance. So let this be your moment, not of fixing, but of rising, not of pretending, but of believing again. You don't need to be whole to be held. You don't need to be unbroken to be used, because the blessing isn't waiting for you after the breaking. It's waiting to meet you in it. God doesn't need you to be whole to use you. There's a lie that sneaks in quietly when life falls apart. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It waits until you're alone, maybe staring at the ceiling in the dark or sitting silently in a crowded place. And then it says, "You failed. You're too broken now. God can't possibly use someone like you anymore." But let me tell you something loud enough to drown that lie out. God does not wait for perfection. He is not looking for flawless resumes, spotless histories, or unshaken faith. He's not auditioning saints. He's calling sons and daughters. And sometimes his loudest yes comes after your hardest fall. The Bible isn't a museum of perfect people. It's a journal of broken lives met by relentless mercy. David was an adulterer and a murderer, and yet Scripture calls him a man after God's own heart. Moses stuttered and doubted. Elijah wanted to die. Peter denied Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. And still, God called them, used them, loved them. And if he did it for them, why would he stop with you? Paul, the same man who once persecuted Christians, wrote these words in 2 Corinthians 12:9. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That means you don't have to hide your wounds to be worthy. In fact, your weakness might be the very canvas on which God is painting a testimony. Imagine that. Imagine if your lowest point was not your disqualification, but your doorway. What if your breaking wasn't the end, but the beginning of blessing? We live in a world obsessed with fixing, with hiding what hurts, with filters, with highlight, reels, with constant pressure to be better before we can be loved. But the gospel is not that. The gospel is a Savior who knelt in the dirt, who touched lepers, who wept at funerals, who forgave in betrayal, and who bled for the broken long before they got it together. Psalm 147:3 says it simply, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." But you can't bind what's still hidden. You can't heal what you won't admit is hurt. So here's the invitation today. Stop waiting to be whole before you start living again. Stop waiting for every scar to fade, every crack to seal, every mistake to disappear. Because God doesn't need you to be whole to begin something holy. He needs your honesty. He needs your surrender. That's it. Maybe you've been measuring yourself by the wrong ruler. Maybe you've been assuming that because others seem further ahead, you must be behind. But don't confuse visibility with value. Some of the most sacred things grow underground. Some of the strongest roots are never seen. And some of the most powerful moments in your life will be the ones no one else claps for, but heaven records them all. Do you know when trees are strongest? Not during the sunshine, but during the storm. The resistance from the wind causes their roots to grow deeper. That's how they stay standing. And maybe that's what this season is for you, a time of deeper rooting, not obvious blooming. But don't mistake hidden for forgotten. Don't mistake silent for absent. God is still with you here. And you don't have to pretend. You don't have to put on the brave face or answer, "I'm fine," when your heart is aching. You are allowed to feel weary. You are allowed to break, but just know, breaking is not the same as being broken beyond repair. Think about Jesus for a moment. At the center of our faith is a man who was betrayed, beaten, and crucified, his body literally broken. And yet from that breaking came the greatest blessing the world has ever known: salvation, redemption, resurrection. The broken body became the bread of life. And if God did his greatest work through brokenness then, why wouldn't he do the same now? Maybe no one ever told you this before, so let me be the one who does. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not too far gone. You are not disqualified. You are not too broken. You are not beyond repair. You are in process, and God is not done with you yet. The hardest part is not falling apart. The hardest part is believing you can still rise again when you do. But that is where faith is forged. Not in the moments when everything is going well, but in the moments when nothing makes sense and you choose to trust anyway. You might be carrying shame today. You might be walking with regrets that echo through your memory like a hallway of locked doors. But if God wanted perfection, he wouldn't have sent a savior. He would have just waited for you to get it right. But he didn't. He came to you as you are, right here. That's why the gospel is good news, because it doesn't say change, then come. It says come, and I'll help you change. There's someone listening who feels like their mistakes define them, who feels like because of what they've done or what's been done to them, they've lost their chance at a meaningful life. But the cross isn't a symbol of lost chances. It's a symbol of new ones. The resurrection wasn't a metaphor. It was a promise that death doesn't win, that endings aren't final, that light breaks through tombs, and that you, no matter how far you've fallen, are still called beloved. Maybe no one sees how hard it's been. Maybe no one knows what it cost you just to wake up today. But heaven sees, God sees. And he calls you not by your failures, but by your future. And here's something that might sound strange, but it's true. The place where you feel weakest might be the place where God's strength shines the most. That's not poetic, it's divine reality. Because when you're at the end of yourself, you're at the beginning of grace. This is not a detour. This is not a waste. This is the soil. And seeds don't bloom by fighting the dirt. They bloom by surrendering to it. So don't despise your dirt. Don't hate the chapter you're in. It's not your whole story. It's just the page you're on right now. And if the page is dark, just remember, some chapters feel like Good Friday, but resurrection is still coming. There will be a day when this ache softens, when the tears dry, when what you lost doesn't sting as sharply, and what you gained in the fire becomes clearer. But you don't have to rush to that day. You just have to take the next breath, the next step, the next honest prayer, and that is enough. Because you don't have to be whole to be held. You don't have to be strong to be seen. And you don't have to be perfect to be used by a God who specializes in turning ashes into beauty and graves into gardens. So if all you can do today is whisper, "God, I'm still here," then that's more than enough. That's a prayer. That's a beginning. That's where blessing begins.
Your wounds will not be wasted. You don't come through a season of pain without carrying something. Sometimes it's visible. A scar, a limp, a line around the eyes that wasn't there before. But most of the time it's hidden. Inside the quiet, behind the smile, underneath the "I'm fine." You carry it like a stone in your pocket, always with you, always heavier than it looks. Pain has a way of convincing you it's pointless, that the nights you cried alone, the losses you couldn't explain, the battles you fought in silence, all amount to nothing more than a personal storm no one else remembers. And yet, what if every single ache you've carried has been shaping you, not scarring you? It's hard to see it when you're in the middle of it. But nothing in the hands of God is wasted. Not even the heartbreak. Not even the detour. Not even the moment you thought you'd lost it all. In fact, some of your deepest wounds might end up becoming your most powerful offerings, if you let them be touched, not hidden. There's a quote I once heard, written softly but full of power. "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." That line comes from Khalil Gibran, a poet who understood pain not as the enemy of meaning, but often its birthplace. And this isn't just poetic, it's profoundly spiritual. Because even our church, in all her wisdom, proclaims this truth again and again. The cross is not just a place of death, it's a pathway to redemption. It's not pain that defines us, but what God can do with it. In one of the most beautiful teachings of Pope John Paul II, he said something that still echoes in hearts around the world. We are not the sum of our weaknesses and failures. We are the sum of the Father's love for us. And that love? It doesn't erase what you've been through. It redeems it. It doesn't skip the wound. It enters it. Maybe you've been walking around with a quiet question inside. Why did this have to happen to me? Or worse, why didn't God stop it? And if that's the question echoing in your heart today, I want to speak directly to it. Not with answers too small for real pain, but with a deeper truth. God doesn't cause every wound, but He never wastes one. What wounded you doesn't get the final word, and what hurt you doesn't get to own you. In the economy of heaven, nothing is thrown away. The tears you cried in secret, they were seen. The losses that no one understood, they were counted. The years you think you wasted, they are being redeemed in ways you can't yet see. Let me tell you a story. Amélie is a woman from Marseille, France. She was 34 when her husband, David, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He was young, healthy, full of life, a history teacher with a deep laugh and a gentle spirit. Within 10 months, he was gone, and Amélie, now a widow, with 2 young boys under 5, found herself lost in a fog of grief so thick she couldn't remember what day it was sometimes. There were no grand miracles, no sudden healing, just heartbreak, paperwork, diapers, and silence. Every morning before the boys woke up, she sat at her tiny kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and wrote letters to God. Not pretty ones, not saintly ones, just raw, honest letters. Sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes just one sentence. I miss him. I don't know how to do this. She kept writing, day after day, no plans to share them, no intention of being inspiring, just survival. After a year, she realized the mornings had changed her. The grief didn't vanish, but it had softened. And she had, almost without noticing, begun to live again. One day at church, a younger widow approached her after Mass. She was just beginning her grief journey, shaky, fragile. Amélie took her hand and said, "Would it help if I shared some of the letters I wrote to God?" That one exchange became the start of something sacred. Today, Amélie leads a small support circle for widows and grieving mothers in her city. Her letters, compiled and translated into 4 languages, are now used in grief counseling centers across Europe. She still wakes early, still writes, But now she does it with one deep truth in her heart. My wound didn't vanish, but it became a well, and I offer others a drink. Your wound is real. No one is asking you to pretend it's not. But what if that place of pain could also become a place of healing for someone else? What if the strength you're building right now, in quiet, in struggle, in perseverance, isn't just for you? Sometimes we ask God to take away the thorn, and sometimes instead, He gives us the strength to carry it, and the wisdom to show someone else how to walk with theirs. The world is full of noise, quick fixes, motivational hype that tries to slap a smile over suffering. But the gospel is different. It's not afraid of the dark. It doesn't run from pain. It walks right into it, bleeding, weeping, breaking open, and then says, "Even here, I am still with you." If Jesus chose to rise with his scars still visible, what makes us think we have to hide ours? Your scar is not your shame. It's your story. And stories, when handed over to God, don't end in silence. They echo. They heal. They reach further than you ever imagined. You might never get a public platform. You might never write a book or speak on a stage. But you will meet someone, someday, somewhere, who is hurting in a way that you understand. And in that moment, your story might become their lifeline. Not because you have all the answers, but because you didn't give up, because you survived, because your eyes hold empathy where others hold pity. And that is sacred ground. There's a strange grace that grows in the soil of suffering, a strength that doesn't shout but stays, a faith that doesn't flaunt but roots deeper. The world will call you strong when you smile again, but heaven called you strong the whole time, even when you were just surviving. So if today all you have is the next breath, the next prayer, the next small yes to life, then that is enough. Let your wound be seen, not flaunted, not polished, just seen, not for attention, but for connection. Because the people around you don't need your perfection. They need your presence, your realness, your testimony and progress. One day you'll look back on this season, not without pain, but with perspective. And you'll say, "I didn't understand it then, but now I see." It wasn't wasted. Not one tear, not 1 hour, not one prayer I thought went unanswered. Because God is not a God of waste. He is a God of resurrection. And in His hands, even your deepest wound can become the beginning of someone else's healing. Don't rush the process. Don't bury the ache. But don't give up on the idea that your life, even the hardest parts, is carrying more meaning than you know. You were not promised a life without pain, but you were promised a love that would meet you in it and never leave you alone there. So walk slowly, cry freely, hope stubbornly, and above all, keep placing your wounds again and again into the hands of the one who knows what it means to be broken and who also knows how to bless what's been torn. He won't waste it. Not your past, not your pain, not your process.
Faith is not the absence of fear. It's the willingness to stand anyway. Fear often gets a bad reputation in conversations about faith, as if feeling afraid somehow proves you don't trust God enough, as if your anxiety is a disqualification. But let's tell the truth. Some of the strongest faith in the world walks hand in hand with trembling knees. You don't need to be fearless to be faithful. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to stand anyway, to move forward even when everything in you is whispering, "Turn back." And if you've ever felt like you were somehow less spiritual because you were scared, because you doubted, because you hesitated, hear this. Fear is part of being human. It's not a flaw. It's not a failure. It's a feeling. And feelings aren't the enemy. It's what you do with that fear that becomes the story. In Psalm 56:3, the writer doesn't pretend to be invincible. He simply says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." Not if I'm afraid, when? Which means even people of deep faith feel afraid. Even people who trust God still face situations that shake them to their core. And this is where courage is born. Not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of it. When you choose to act anyway, to trust anyway, to keep walking, not because it's easy, but because you know who walks beside you. Nelson Mandela once said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." And that triumph doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like showing up for work with a heavy heart. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I forgive you," when your voice is shaking. Sometimes it looks like opening the door to healing when all you want to do is hide. There's a story I want to tell you. It's not one that made the news. It won't show up on a stage, but it's the kind of quiet courage that changes the world in invisible, eternal ways. Adrian is a 62-year-old man from Manila, Philippines. He spent most of his life working as a seafarer, a job that demanded long stretches of time away from home, across oceans, with only brief moments of return. It was a hard life, but he carried it with pride. He was supporting his family, paying for his children's education, building a future, until suddenly that future cracked. A minor accident on board led to a medical exam. The result? A slow-developing retinal disorder. Adrian had begun to lose vision in one eye. Nothing could reverse it. Just like that, his maritime career, the identity he had carried for over 30 years, was gone. He didn't show it at first, but the loss crushed him. Not just the income, but the purpose, the routine, the confidence. It was more than a job. It was who he had been. And now in his 60s, he was unsure of what came next. But every morning, Adrian still woke up at 5 a.m. He walked slowly to a small chapel down the street from his home. He didn't ask God for miracles. He didn't beg for the past. He simply prayed, "Lord, I'm still here. Please guide me into whatever this new season is supposed to be." That prayer didn't change the diagnosis. It didn't reopen his old job. But it did something deeper. It kept him soft. It kept him willing. And that willingness is what made space for something new. A few months later, one of his nephews, who was studying to become a ship captain, asked if Adrian could help tutor him in maritime safety. Word got around. Other students began showing up. Adrian's home slowly turned into an informal training space. By the end of the year, he was running a small community course for young seafarers preparing for certification exams. He didn't plan it. He didn't chase it. He just kept standing, fear and all, and God met him there. He once told a priest, "I was so scared I'd be useless." But it turns out, even when one door closed, I still carried the wisdom to help someone else open theirs. That's faith, not absence of fear, but the choice to still stand. Maybe today you're facing a situation that's left you paralyzed, a choice you don't know how to make, a next step that feels impossible. Maybe you've been praying for clarity and hearing silence instead. Maybe your hands are shaking with the weight of what's unknown. But hear me clearly. Courage doesn't mean you don't feel the fear. It means the fear doesn't get the final word. You can be afraid and still faithful. You can tremble and still trust. God is not offended by your emotions. He's not disappointed in your weakness. He is near to the trembling, near to the overwhelmed, near to the scared, but still willing. Sometimes we think of bravery as big, loud, visible acts. But some of the most heroic moments of faith happen in private, quiet spaces. Someone showing up to therapy. Someone making that difficult phone call. Someone saying no to something toxic, even when it means being alone for a while. Someone simply getting out of bed when grief makes it almost unbearable. You don't need to roar. You don't need to have perfect words. You just need to show up as you are and take the next honest step. And the next step doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't have to solve everything. Sometimes all it needs to be is this: God, I don't feel ready, but I'm willing. Lead me. Because here's what faith really is. Not certainty, but surrender. Not control, but trust. Not having every answer, but trust in the one who does. You don't have to wait until you feel brave to begin. You don't have to wait until the fear is gone. Start with shaky steps. Start with a whispered prayer. Start with one breath, one decision, one act of obedience. And here's the grace in it. You're not walking alone. God never asked you to be strong on your own. He never said, figure it out, then follow me. He said, come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. So if your heart is beating faster right now, if something inside you knows there's a next step you've been avoiding because of fear, let this be your moment, not to become someone else, but to become you, the braver, softer, faith-filled version of yourself who walks forward despite the fear, not in the absence of it. There is something holy about standing in your weakness and saying, even if I'm scared, I'm not stopping. That kind of faith shakes darkness. That kind of faith plants seeds in dry ground. That kind of faith will take you places fear tried to keep you from. And when you look back, whether in weeks or years, you won't remember how afraid you were. You'll remember that you moved anyway, that you stood anyway, that you didn't give fear the final say. Don't wait for permission from your emotions. Don't wait for your knees to stop trembling. Take the next step, and then the one after that. The fear may still whisper, but your faith will speak louder, not with noise, but with movement. God isn't asking you to leap over the mountain today. He's asking you to walk with Him up the path, one step at a time. And you already have what it takes, not because you feel strong, but because He is strong in you. Adrian said something that stuck with me. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't rehearsed. He said, I just kept waking up and showing up. That's all. I kept showing up. That's what you're doing right now, too. By listening, by choosing not to quit, by letting this moment touch you, even if your heart's been numb for a while. So stand, even if it's shaky, even if it hurts, even if no one else sees. Stand, because this is where the tide turns. Stand, because this is where healing begins. Stand, because this is what faith looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of perseverance. And if you can't stand yet, then sit with God. Sit with your fear. Sit with your sorrow. But stay. Stay long enough for grace to reach you. Because it will. It always does.
Broken roads can still lead to beautiful destinations. Some journeys begin with clarity, blue skies, open maps, all green lights ahead, but not all of them. Sometimes the road beneath you cracks without warning, plans fall through, people walk away. Your confidence disappears like fog at noon, and suddenly you're standing at the edge of a life you thought you understood, holding nothing but pieces. Maybe that's where you are today. Not at a starting line, not at a finish line, but somewhere in the middle of a winding, messy road you didn't plan for. And maybe you've started to believe the road you're on is too broken to lead anywhere good. Maybe you've looked around and said, "This is not the life I wanted, not the one I prayed for." And maybe, silently, you've wondered if it still matters that you're trying. But listen closely to this. Just because the path is broken doesn't mean the destination is. There's a quote I've carried for years that comes from someone who knows what it means to live without limbs, to battle despair and shame, and still choose hope. Nick Vujicic once said, "God can turn broken pieces into a masterpiece. And if he can do it for someone with no arms or legs, he can do it for you too." Because the beauty of God's map is that it's not linear. His route doesn't rely on straight roads or predictable paths. It's not about avoiding detours. It's about transforming them. That's what the writer of Proverbs meant when he said, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Proverbs 3:5. Because your understanding will want things to be neat, smooth, sensible. But God's plans are deeper than your logic. His roots are wiser than your vision. He sees the forest when you're staring at trees. I want to tell you a story that proves that. Lucia was 19 when her world fell apart. She was a university student in Bogota, Colombia, bright, focused, top of her class in psychology, on track for a future that, on paper, looked perfect. But underneath her academic success, Lucia had been silently battling anxiety and depression for years. She kept it buried, smiling in public, performing at school, breaking quietly in private. One day, during final exams, the pressure finally boiled over. She had a panic attack so intense she collapsed. That day began a long unraveling. She dropped out of school. She stopped answering calls. She deleted her social media. For weeks, she didn't leave the house. Her family was religious but didn't quite understand what she was going through. They prayed, but they didn't know how to talk to her. She felt both watched and invisible. And in that silence, the voice of shame got louder. One morning, after barely sleeping, Lucia did something unexpected. She walked. No goal, no destination, just the weight of her body moving through space. She ended up at a nearby park. It was barely dawn. The city hadn't woken up yet. And as she sat on a bench surrounded by fog and birdsong, she began whispering Psalm 23 from memory. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." She wasn't quoting it to be holy. She was quoting it because it was the only thing that had stuck with her from childhood church. And somehow, saying it out loud made her feel less alone. She did it again, the next morning, and the next. It became her rhythm. One day, while sitting on her usual bench, an elderly woman sat beside her. She didn't say anything at first, then gently asked, "Are you okay?" Lucia hesitated, then nodded. The woman named Beatrice smiled and said, "I used to sit here just like you. I was once where you are." They talked for almost an hour. Lucia learned that Beatrice had been a therapist for decades before she retired. She didn't offer advice. She didn't push. She just listened and told Lucia she wasn't crazy or weak or broken beyond repair. "You're tired," she said, "but tired doesn't mean done." They kept meeting. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in silence. Over time, Lucia began journaling again. Eventually, she applied for a part-time community outreach job. She didn't go back to university, but she enrolled in a pastoral care course offered through her parish. She said something once that stayed with me. "I thought I had failed when I stepped off the road everyone expected me to follow. But it turns out it wasn't a failure. It was a reroute. I didn't lose my purpose. I found it where I least expected." And that's what I want to say to you too. Just because the road changed doesn't mean you missed your destiny. Just because your life doesn't look like the plan doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. You are not off track. You're in process. Sometimes we think God only blesses the right choices, these smart paths, the ones with 5-year plans and clean resumes. But God blesses faithfulness more than success. He blesses surrender more than strategy. And if you're still showing up, still waking up, still trying, still praying through your doubts, then you're walking the road He sees, even if no one else does. Here's the thing about broken roads. They teach you things smooth highways never can. They slow you down enough to notice beauty. They strip away performance. They confront your ego. And they bring you face to face with grace. Not the glittery kind, but the grounded, honest, quiet kind that meets you when you're curled up on the floor wondering how to go on. Maybe you're grieving the story you thought you'd have by now. The job, the marriage, the health, the success. Maybe the detour feels like punishment, but friend, what if it's protection? What if what you thought was a delay was actually a divine redirection? You're not behind. You're being rerouted. Don't measure your life only by the plans that fell through. Measure it by the perseverance you chose in their place, the kindness you gave yourself when everything went quiet, the courage it took to keep going when the crowd disappeared. Because God doesn't just work in destination moments, He works in detour seasons. And He's not pacing in heaven, waiting for you to get back to plan A. He's already walking with you in plan B, plan C, and plan I have no idea what I'm doing anymore. His presence is not limited to your progress. It's not earned by your performance. It's promised to your process. So maybe your road is winding. Maybe it's cracked. Maybe you've been crawling more than walking lately. That's okay. It's still a road, and it still leads somewhere beautiful. You don't have to see the full picture to trust the painter. You don't have to understand the map to trust the guide. You just need to take the next small step and believe that even now, is not wasted. Lucia's path didn't take her back to the university, but it led her toward people who needed her voice, her listening, her light. And her faith grew not in lecture halls, but in quiet mornings with open skies and open psalms. That's where your faith is growing too. Not just in answered prayers, but in the prayers you keep praying even when the answer hasn't come. Not just in open doors, but in the hallway in between. So hold on, keep walking, even slowly. There is a beauty being built in you right now that will not make sense until later, but one day you will look back and whisper, "Oh, that's why I had to go that way." And it won't erase the pain, but it will make it holy. You're not too far gone. You're just not finished yet. Sometimes the deepest ache doesn't come from what you've lost, but from what you think you've become because of it. You look at your life, your choices, the bruises you now carry, and something in you whispers, "It's too late for me." You see the damage, the delay, the distance you've drifted from the version of yourself you used to dream about, and you wonder quietly if you've missed your chance. But please hear this. You're not too far gone. You're just not finished yet. There's this unspoken myth in our minds that redemption is reserved for the early chapters of our lives. That grace shows up when you're young and eager and full of potential, but not when you're tired, unsure, and wrecked from reality. But that myth has no place in the gospel. Because the gospel is not about what you still have to offer. It's about what God never stopped offering you. There's a passage from Romans that many of us have heard before, but today, let it sink deeper. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God. Romans 8:38-39. Not your failures, not your doubts, not your detours, not even the version of you that walked away for a while. God's love is not fragile. It doesn't back down when you stumble. It doesn't withdraw when you're inconsistent. It is the most stubborn, steady, unshakable force in the universe, and it's still after you, even here. Henri Nouwen, a priest who knew both public ministry and personal despair, once said, "No one is ever too lost to be loved by God." He didn't say almost no one. He said no one, and that includes you. Maybe you need a real-life picture of this. Let me tell you about Matteo. Matteo grew up in Naples, Italy. His early life was shaped by hardship and hustle. By the time he was 30, he was involved in multiple financial schemes, manipulating systems, cutting corners, doing whatever he could to survive in a world he felt never gave him a fair shot. Eventually, his decisions caught up with him. He was arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison. His reputation was destroyed. His family was shattered. In his first year behind bars, he became bitter, convinced that everything was ruined and that he had ruined it. But something changed when he was transferred to a different facility. It was quieter. Older inmates were allowed to request books, and a volunteer from a local parish would bring them each week. Matteo wasn't religious, but out of boredom, he asked for something to read. They gave him a Bible. He started out just flipping through it. Then he landed in the Gospels, and somewhere between the Beatitudes and the parables, between Peter's denial and Jesus' resurrection, something cracked open. It didn't happen all at once, but he kept reading, kept showing up to the small chapel in the prison courtyard, kept writing letters, long, handwritten letters to people he had wronged. He never asked for anything in return, just forgiveness, just a second chance to tell the truth. By the time he was released, Matteo was 45. He had no money, no career, but he had something new, peace, and a deep sense that his story wasn't over yet. Today, Matteo works at a re-entry center helping other formerly incarcerated men find housing, jobs, and counseling. Every Tuesday night, he runs a small Bible study in a borrowed church basement. And at the end of every group, he says the same thing. "I used to be a thief. Now I build again, with grace." Not because he earned it, but because grace doesn't wait for us to clean up first. Maybe that's what you need to know today. You don't need to have a dramatic testimony or a perfect ending. You just need to know you're not done yet. Because you're not. You're still breathing, still here, still capable of healing, rebuilding, forgiving, beginning again. You may have messed up, you may have wandered, you may have broken trust, lost time, wasted opportunities, but you're not beyond redemption. You're not a lost cause. You're not irreparably broken. You're still in God's hands, and God doesn't throw people away. He restores. Restoration doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means something deeper, taking what did happen and making something beautiful with it anyway. Redemption is not the absence of scars. It's the presence of purpose in the middle of them. So stop disqualifying yourself from the very grace that was meant for you. Stop assuming that because the crowd walked away, God did too. He hasn't. He won't. That's not who he is. The same Jesus who knelt in the dirt with the woman caught in shame, who called the prodigal home with no conditions, who ate with sinners and touched lepers and forgave his betrayers, that Jesus hasn't changed, and he's still calling your name. Not to shame you, but to remind you who you are. You are not your worst moment. You are not your last mistake. You are not your delay, your damage, or your despair. You are still beloved. And the fact that you're still here, still trying, still listening, still hoping, is proof that God hasn't let you go. Maybe all you can do today is whisper, I want to start again. That's more than enough. Because the beginning of blessing is not perfection, it's permission. Permission to hope again, to believe again, to say, even now, I am not done. Let's return to the image we began with. A crack in the wall isn't always a sign of collapse. It might just be the place where light begins to seep in. What if that crack in you, the thing that still aches, the moment that changed everything, the loss you didn't choose? What if that is the place where God is pouring something sacred into your life? What if your healing didn't have to wait for everything to be fixed? What if the blessing starts right there? There's a kind of holiness found only in people who have been broken and still chose to love. A kind of wisdom that lives in people who've walked through the valley and decided not to give up. A kind of beauty that can't be earned or faked. It's the kind that comes from ashes turned into something alive. So if no one has told you this yet today, let me be the one to say it. You're not behind. You're not disqualified. You're not forgotten. You are still in the story. You are still growing. You are still worth the grace that God never stopped offering. So breathe, stand, begin again. You're not too far gone. You're just not finished yet. And from broken, you will be blessed.